It was Christmas Eve. A night meant for warmth, for family, for laughter. But instead, the bitter cold of the Wisconsin winter cut through me as I stood frozen in front of my mother's door, my 7-year-old son, Noah, clutching my side. I had arrived early, hoping for a peaceful evening with my family, a chance to finally feel like I belonged after years of pushing myself to prove that I mattered. But that was before the door opened, revealing my mother's eyes, cold and indifferent, looking through me as though I wasn't even there. "Go home," she said, her voice sharp as a knife, cutting through the silence of the snowy night. "There's no room left." No room. It wasn't the first time my mother had dismissed me, but this stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. I could see her standing there, blocking the doorway with that familiar coldness that had defined our relationship for years. My son, Noah, fidgeted beside me, unsure why Grandma wasn't inviting us inside. I knelt down to reassure him, but the words felt empty. "It's okay, buddy. We'll go somewhere else," I said, my voice steady despite the shock coursing through me. Noah's little hand tightened around mine, his soft eyes welling with tears as he whispered, "But I made her a card." I swallowed the lump in my throat and glanced back at the door. My mother didn't even flinch. She didn't apologize, didn't offer an explanation. She just stood there, her eyes as cold as the wind that whipped around us. "Go home, Jessica. There's no room for you here." I couldn't move. For a moment, I considered knocking again, begging her to let us in. But I knew that would only be more humiliation. I didn't need to beg. Not anymore. I picked up Noah and turned away, my back stiff, my pride bruised but intact. We walked back to the car in silence, the snow crunching under our boots with every step. The lights from the lodge reflected in the distance, warm, inviting. But not for us. We were the outsiders. I couldn't help but wonder, was this how it had always been? As I buckled Noah into his car seat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew it wasn't going to be an apology. There would be no heartfelt text from my father, no message from my brother asking why we weren't at the party. I didn't even bother checking it. I had been through this too many times. They wouldn't care. I started the car, the heater humming to life as the cold inside my chest slowly began to thaw. "We're going home, Ben," I said, my voice low. "We're going to have our own Christmas." Noah sniffled beside me. He was trying so hard to stay brave, but I could hear the sadness in his voice when he whispered, "Grandma hates me." "No," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "She doesn't hate you. She loves you. But she doesn't know how to show it." I bit my lip, trying to swallow the rising anger and hurt. How do you explain the cruelty of adults to a child? The drive back was silent except for the low hum of the car and the soft sound of Christmas carols on the radio. The world outside was a blur of white, the snowflakes falling in steady rhythm, each one unique, but all ultimately lost in the sea of cold. As we approached the winding road out of the lodge, something in me snapped. I had spent so many years trying to prove myself, trying to be the daughter they would finally accept, the one who wasn't the afterthought, the one who wouldn't be left out. I had worked so hard, paid my dues, built my life on my own. And yet here I was again, rejected, cast aside like I was nothing. But I wasn't going to do this anymore. I wasn't going to let them control me. I wasn't going to let them tear me down any longer. We drove away, the lights from the lodge fading in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't anger. It was something else. Something new. A strange calm washed over me as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the cold air rushing through the cracks in the windows, mingling with the quiet warmth in my chest. I was done. The cold seeped into my bones, its sting creeping through the layers of my jacket as I stood outside the crumbling boathouse. The wind howled like a dying animal, and the snow piled higher with every passing minute. The place where my father died, where the fire took everything from us, it had always felt like a ghost had lingered here, refusing to leave. But there was something I couldn't shake. This wasn't just about the fire. This wasn't just about losing him. I don't believe in accidents, Frank's voice echoed in my mind, the old man who had appeared out of nowhere. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted your father dead. My heart hammered in my chest as I approached the rotting structure, the dim light of my flashlight catching on charred wood and remnants of what had once been. I had come here looking for answers, but now I was only more lost. The fire that killed my father, that had always been the story. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The letter, the message about the burned truth, it had only raised more questions. A crackling noise snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned, the flashlight wavering in my hand, catching a shadow in the distance. My heart skipped. A man, hunched against the wind, his face obscured by a thick parka, stepped toward me. I told you I'd be waiting, Frank's voice was almost a whisper against the wind. You've got to stop asking questions. I swallowed hard. Who are you, really? Frank had been the one to give me that letter. The one who seemed to know more about my family than I did. I couldn't trust him, but right now, I didn't have many options. As much as my instincts screamed at me to turn and run, I couldn't leave without knowing the truth. Not now. He stepped forward and handed me something. A box. A small, metal box. I hesitated. What's this? His eyes met mine. Your father left you something. It's all inside. I opened it slowly, my fingers trembling, expecting, I wasn't sure what. A key? A map? Instead, there was a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully, my breath catching as I read the words. If they get their hands on this, you are dead. Do not trust anyone. Not Claudia. Not Daniel. The ground felt like it shifted beneath me. My father had known. He had known everything about Claudia, about Daniel, about their betrayal. Frank spoke again, his voice low, as if sharing a secret. Your mother and brother, they're not who you think they are. You need to stop trusting them. My mind reeled. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps behind me froze me in place. I turned, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. There, emerging from the shadows, were two figures. My mother, Claudia, and my brother, Daniel. They had been standing there the whole time. Ethan, my mother's voice was cold, calculating. We need to talk. I didn't move, my eyes locked on her. The lies, the secrets, the distance between us, it had all been leading to this moment. I was supposed to be the one who trusted them. I was supposed to be the one who believed in family. But that illusion had been shattered. I stepped back, holding the box to my chest. No, we don't need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the flood of emotions battling inside me. I know everything now. The tension in the air was palpable. My mother's eyes flicked to Daniel, and for a moment, I saw something pass between them, something dark, something that made my stomach churn. You don't know anything, Daniel said, his tone flat, but I could see the flicker of guilt in his eyes. This is bigger than you think. I stood frozen, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. My father's warning echoed in my mind, don't trust anyone. But how could I know who to trust now? Who was the enemy? And what did it mean for me, for us, if I opened this Pandora's box? The silence stretched. And then, the gunshot. It was so sudden, so loud, that for a moment, I couldn't process it. The world seemed to slow down. My body went rigid, every instinct screaming at me to move, but I couldn't. Not until I saw what happened next. Daniel staggered back, his hand clutching his side. Blood soaked through his shirt in a dark, spreading stain. He collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock. My mother stood there, a gun in her hand, her face a mask of cold indifference. I couldn't let you ruin everything, Ethan, she said, her voice eerily calm. You were never meant to know. I rushed to Daniel, ignoring the rising panic in my chest. Blood poured from his wound, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep him alive. I had to make sense of this, even if it killed me. The gunshot had shattered everything. And I knew, in that moment, that my life would never be the same. Hook, line, cliffhanger. In that moment, I realized they had been playing a game I didn't know existed, and now I was their pawn. The weight of the metal box in my hands felt like a ticking time bomb. Each step I took toward the cabin seemed heavier, like the snow beneath me was trying to pull me back into the past. I could feel Frank's eyes on me, but I couldn't look back. Not now. I had the letter, the one my father had written, the one that had warned me about Claudia and Daniel, about the game they were playing. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt tight, my hands shaking. I forced myself to walk faster, past the creaking, dilapidated cabin. The truth was out there. I had to find it. But as much as I told myself that, there was another part of me that wanted to ignore it. To walk away, pretend I never saw any of this. But I couldn't. Because once the truth was out, there was no going back. The truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. The words echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of everything that had happened. And I knew, even as I reached the door to the cabin, that the worst was still to come. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. There was no sign of Frank. No one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows in the corner seemed to twitch, and the crackling of the fire felt too loud, too constant. I shoved the door shut behind me and locked it. The box was still in my hands, the edges pressing into my palm. But it wasn't just a box. It was what was inside that terrified me. The truth my father had left behind. I dropped to my knees in front of the fireplace and unfolded the letter once more. It wasn't long. Just a few short lines, but those words felt like a guillotine hanging over my head. If they get their hands on this, you are dead. I read it again, trying to make sense of the cryptic message. It didn't make sense. My father had always been secretive, but this was different. I could hear my breath coming faster, my heart beating harder in my chest. Suddenly, the sound of a car pulling up outside sliced through the silence. My stomach dropped. I knew who it was. I grabbed the letter, shoved it into my jacket pocket, and stood. But before I could make it to the door, I heard the knock. It was slow, methodical, as if they were giving me time to make my decision. Ethan, the voice outside called. It was my mother. Open up. The calmness in her voice sent a shiver down my spine. There was no concern, no urgency. Just the coldness of someone who had everything figured out. We need to talk. I didn't move. You've gone too far this time, my brother Daniel's voice cut through the silence. Just open the damn door, Ethan. We need to settle this. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear into the darkness of the woods. But I couldn't. The letter, the truth, everything was right there in front of me. I was cornered. And the worst part was, I knew it. This was it. The moment I would either survive or be swallowed whole. The knock came again, more insistent this time. I opened the door. My mother stepped inside, followed by Daniel. Neither of them looked at me. Their eyes were cold, distant. My mother's lips curled into a faint smile. I knew you would be here. Daniel shoved past me and stood by the fire, his eyes never leaving the ground. You're making this harder than it needs to be, my mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Just give us the letter, Ethan. It's all we need. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body was frozen, the weight of the moment pressing on me. You've been playing us all along, Daniel said, his voice low but full of venom. You were never supposed to find out. We had a plan, and now you're ruining it. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I wanted to scream. To tell him everything I had just learned. But something held me back. Something told me I wasn't ready. Not yet. Why? I finally whispered. Why do this? You had everything. Why destroy it? My mother laughed, a cold, hollow sound. It's always been about survival, Ethan. You just didn't know the rules. And the rules were, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. The rules were simple, Daniel said, stepping forward. You do what you're told. You never question it. You sign everything over, and you go along with the plan. I felt the room close in on me. The walls, the shadows, the pressure, it was all too much. What's in the letter, Ethan? My mother's voice was sharper now, demanding. I pulled the letter out of my jacket pocket, but before I could hand it over, I heard something from outside. A car door slamming. A voice calling. Ethan, get away from them. Frank's voice. I turned just in time to see Frank running toward the cabin, blood streaming from a wound in his side. He barely made it to the door before collapsing against it. They've got everything planned, Frank gasped, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. You're not just a pawn, Ethan. You're the final piece. Before I could react, the door swung open. The men in black suits poured in, their guns raised. Get down! Frank shouted. The world exploded into chaos. Cliffhanger. And in that moment, I realized the truth had never been meant for me, it had always been a weapon. The moment the men in black suits stepped into the cabin, the air felt like it thickened, every second stretching longer than the last. I could hear the rush of blood in my ears, my fingers frozen on the gun I had no choice but to clutch. Frank, bleeding out on the floor, had barely made it inside before he collapsed. His blood stained the wooden floorboards beneath him, but his eyes never left mine. Get out, Ethan, Frank rasped, his voice barely audible. They've already won. I shook my head, trying to force my brain to make sense of everything. The gunmen hadn't made a move yet. They were just standing there, calculating. Watching. I reached for the phone in my pocket. Call 911, I whispered to myself, but the words barely left my lips before I realized the danger in doing so. The walls were closing in, and the decision I made now would define everything. Don't bother, one of the men said, his voice low and calm, as if he had done this 100 times. This is over. His eyes met mine, calculating, studying me, like a man looking for weaknesses. There was no fear in him. It made me sick. Frank's breathing grew shallower, and a cold, gut-wrenching realization hit me. The man I had trusted for answers, the one who had pulled me into this mess, might die in front of me, and with him, any chance of finding the truth. Why? I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Why kill him? Why are you doing this? The man took a step forward, still keeping his gun trained on me. Because your family's got a plan, and you're a problem, he said, his smile too wide to be sincere. Now, it's time for you to realize just how deep this goes. I was shaking now. My fingers trembled around the phone as I hesitated. What the hell had I stumbled into? Was my family truly this ruthless? And how did Frank know all of this? The man's gaze flicked to Frank, then back to me. You've got a choice to make, Ethan. His voice was clipped, cold. Either you walk away and leave everything behind, or you join the fight. I didn't answer. My mind raced, but it wasn't until Frank's weak voice interrupted the silence that I finally snapped into motion. Don't let them win, Frank said, each word strained. Find out what they're hiding. You have to. It's all in the box. Everything. They've been lying to you. The man let out a harsh laugh. We don't need to lie to you anymore. We're done. The game's over. His finger hovered over the trigger. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have time. But one thing was clear, I wasn't about to let them take me without a fight. I looked down at Frank, my hand trembling around the gun. His eyes were filled with urgency, and for a split second, I saw something else, fear. Frank had been hiding something from me, and now, so were they. The letter, Frank managed, his voice barely audible. The truth. It's all in the damn letter. Find it before they destroy everything. Before I could respond, the sound of tires screeching on the gravel driveway sliced through the air. The men froze. They weren't expecting this. In a flash, I made my decision. I turned and bolted toward the back door, the gun still in my hand. Behind me, I heard Frank's weak voice call out, "It's not over, Ethan." The door creaked open just as I heard footsteps behind me. I didn't dare look back. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted into the woods, the cold air stinging my face. I needed to get to the letter. I needed to find out everything Frank had left behind before they found me. "They think you'll never find it," Frank's voice echoed in my mind, but I couldn't stop now. I couldn't let them win. I heard the snap of twigs behind me, the sound of footsteps getting closer. I had seconds, maybe a minute before they caught up. I reached for the box in my jacket, pulling it out just as a light flashed through the trees, blinding me. "Stop!" A voice called from behind. "You're making this worse for yourself." I turned sharply, my legs buckling beneath me as I hit the ground, the box still gripped in my hand. The men were closing in, but my mind was clearer now. They weren't just after me. They were after the truth. And in that moment, I realized something even worse than death. I had been played. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to get away. But before I could even make it 5 steps, I heard the sound of a gun being cocked. "Drop it," the man commanded. His voice was cold, steady. Now. I had nowhere to run. I dropped to my knees, the box still clutched in my hand. The truth was in it. The truth about everything, the fire, the lies, the betrayal. And now, it was all I had left. But it wouldn't be enough if I didn't get away. Cliffhanger. And in that moment, I realized the letter wasn't just a message. It was my final chance to stop them. The blood was still fresh on my hands when I stumbled through the woods. Frank's words echoed in my ears. "The truth is still alive." I didn't know if I could trust him. I didn't know if I could trust anyone anymore. My hands shook as I gripped the box tighter. The weight of it felt like a chain wrapped around my chest. I had made it this far, but now there was no turning back. My father had hidden something inside this box, something that could bring down everything my family had worked so hard to protect. But it was more than that. This wasn't just about money or power. This was about betrayal. The kind that cuts deep. I forced myself to push forward, ignoring the sting in my side where the bullet grazed me earlier. Each breath felt like it might be my last, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel road broke through the tension. I froze, crouching low in the snow, trying to stay hidden. A dark sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the night like a pair of searchlights. "Move," I whispered to myself. "Move." I took off running, but my legs felt like lead. The adrenaline coursed through my veins, but it wasn't enough. I could feel them getting closer. The men in black suits. They knew I was headed to the airstrip. They'd been tracking me ever since I grabbed that damn letter. I had no plan. I had no backup. But I did have one thing, the truth. It was the only thing that could save me now. I reached the small clearing where the plane sat, abandoned and forgotten, its rusted wings gleaming in the dim light. But there was no time to admire it. I had to get the engine started. "I can't do this." The words left my mouth without thought. I wasn't a pilot. I didn't know how to fly. But I didn't have a choice. This was my only shot. As I scrambled into the cockpit, my hand slipped on the cold metal. The key. I fumbled for it, my fingers numb. The sound of footsteps behind me sent a chill down my spine. They were too close. I jammed the key into the ignition and twisted. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The hum of the propellers filled the air as I slammed the throttle forward. I barely had time to look out the window before I was airborne, the world below me shrinking into the darkness. But just as I thought I had escaped, a sharp, deafening crack split the air. The plane jolted, and I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I gritted my teeth, gripping the controls, trying to steady myself as the plane wavered. Shit! I looked out the window. A black SUV was tailing me, speeding down the airstrip, its headlights blazing. They hadn't given up. They were coming for me. Come on, come on. My voice was a rasp. I pressed the throttle harder, trying to gain altitude. But the pain in my shoulder made it impossible to focus. I had no idea where I was going. I couldn't even see straight. My vision blurred, and I felt my head spin. The SUV was getting closer. They wouldn't stop. Suddenly, I heard a faint crackling noise through the radio. My heart skipped. A voice came through, distorted but clear enough to make out. Ethan, you're not alone. The voice was cold. I didn't recognize it, but I felt the weight of its meaning. I gripped the controls tighter, trying to stay focused. I couldn't let them get to me. Not now. But my mind was a mess. I had no idea what was going on. The letter. The truth. My family. They had been lying to me all along. I had trusted them. And now they were trying to kill me. What the hell did you do, Ethan? I muttered under my breath. I could see the lights of the SUV closing in on me. They were gaining. Ethan, listen to me. You can't outrun this, the voice on the radio said again. There's more at stake here than you realize. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't care. I just needed to survive. But then, as I pushed the plane higher, I saw something that froze me. A figure standing in the middle of the airstrip, illuminated by the headlights of the SUV. No, it can't be. I recognized the figure. It was Daniel. I tried to veer off course, but it was too late. The plane dipped, and I felt the engine sputter. The world tilted, and I lost control. The last thing I saw was Daniel's face, twisted into a cold, knowing smile, before everything went black. Cliffhanger. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for my soul. The moment I opened my eyes, I knew something had changed. The sharp pain in my shoulder was gone, replaced by the fog of consciousness. The plane was no longer spiraling, and the cold metal beneath me had become warm once more. My body still felt the tension, but for the first time in what felt like weeks, I wasn't running. I was sitting in a small room, a place I didn't recognize. The walls were bare, the air stale. The sound of distant voices reached my ears, but I couldn't make out the words. I forced myself to sit up, the dull ache in my side reminding me of how close I had come to losing everything. But the worst wasn't over. It never is. I glanced at the desk beside me. On it, the box Frank had given me. The one that had started all of this. The letter inside had felt like a bomb ticking in my hand, its words branded into my mind. If they get their hands on this, you're dead. I reached for it, the envelope still sealed, untouched. It had been too much to handle all at once, too much to believe. But now, I needed to know. The letter was the key to everything. It was the one thing that could tear apart the lies. I tore open the envelope with trembling hands, my breath catching in my throat. I unfolded the letter, the paper brittle under my fingers. The truth is a dangerous thing. It has a way of coming for those who try to bury it. The words burned in my mind. I was about to learn something that would change everything. The sound of footsteps broke my focus. I looked up, and there he was, my brother Daniel. His face was unreadable, but the flicker of guilt in his eyes was enough. He stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame like it was all business. You shouldn't have gone this far, Ethan, he said, his voice cold, but I could hear the tremor behind it. You really should have just stayed out of this. I clenched the letter in my hand, my pulse quickening. You knew. All along. About Dad. About everything. And you let me believe the lies. Daniel's face twitched. He took a step forward, but then hesitated, as if he was searching for the right words. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said quietly. "It was never meant to go this far." I stood up, the room spinning for a second as my legs threatened to give out. "It was never supposed to happen, but it did. You've been playing a game that you didn't think anyone would notice, but I did. I always did." He looked away, his gaze dropping to the floor. "You don't understand. None of us did. This is bigger than you think." I stepped forward, my fists clenching. "No, Daniel. You've been playing me, using me. For what? Power? Money? What is it?" The tension between us was suffocating. The lies, the betrayal, it was all coming to a head now. Daniel wasn't the brother I thought he was. None of them were. "I didn't have a choice," Daniel muttered, his voice shaking now. "None of us did. But you, Ethan, you were supposed to help us finish this. You were supposed to sign the papers. It was all supposed to work out." I backed away from him, the letter still in my hand. My whole life had been a lie, but the truth was too dangerous. The letter, the documents, they all held the key to everything. And now, it was in my hands. "I'm not going to be your pawn anymore, Daniel." My voice was low, but firm. "You and Mom, you've built your empire on lies. And I'm done being a part of it." Before he could respond, a loud knock echoed through the door. I turned toward it, the air thick with tension. Daniel's face hardened, but he didn't move to answer. "It's over," he whispered, almost to himself. I didn't wait for him to stop me. I knew what I had to do. I stepped to the door, opened it, and standing there was a woman I never thought I would see again, my mother, Claudia. Her eyes were cold, calculating. But there was something else there too, something darker. Something that told me the truth about her, about everything. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth, as if everything was normal. "You're not getting away with this. You don't know what you're doing." I felt the weight of her words, but I didn't flinch. I was done running, done pretending that I didn't have a choice. "You should have never underestimated me," I said, my voice hard. "This ends today." The letter in my hand felt like a lifeline, a promise of justice. I wasn't just fighting for the money or the inheritance anymore. I was fighting for my father's legacy, for the truth that had been buried for so long. Claudia took a step toward me, her eyes narrowing. "You really think you can win, Ethan? This is bigger than you." I stood taller, staring her down. "You don't get it. The truth is bigger than any of us." Before she could respond, I pulled the letter from my pocket and handed it to her, watching her face fall as she realized what she had just lost. The game was over. As I turned away from my mother, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The betrayal, the lies, they didn't matter anymore. I had won, not because of the money or the power, but because I had the truth. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Cliffhanger. They tried to bury the truth, but the truth always finds a way to rise.